August 12, 1917. The skies above the Western Front, 15,000 feet over the Somme Valley. Major Oswald Belka's protege, Lieutenant Werner Voss, pulls his Albatros D3 into a climbing turn and watches something that makes his hand freeze on the control stick. Below him, a formation of 7 British SE-5A fighters moves across the sky. But they're not flying in the neat parade ground line that every air service in the world has adopted since the war began. Instead, they're staggered, offset at different altitudes, stepped like stairs, each aircraft positioned where it can see threats the others can't, where each pilot can cover his wingman's blind spot. Voss has seen this pattern before, not in combat, in nature, migrating geese, hunting falcons, starlings evading hawks. He banks away without engaging, his mind racing faster than his BMW engine. The British shouldn't be flying like this. There are no official tactics for this formation, no doctrine, no training manual. Someone down there is improvising, thinking like a predator instead of a parade marshal. And if this catches on, if the Allies figure out what this young German ace already understands in this moment, everything the Central Powers have learned about air combat over 3 bloody years becomes obsolete. What Voss couldn't know as he turned for home was that the pilot leading that experimental formation, a South African named Major Andrew Beauchamp-Proctor, had spent the last 6 months studying bird formations through binoculars during dawn patrols. And what Beauchamp-Proctor's observations would unleash would transform aerial warfare from glorified cavalry charges into the fluid, 3-dimensional chess game that defines fighter combat to this day. For 3 years, the skies over Europe had been a killing ground governed by one tactical principle. Formation meant safety, and formation meant flying in neat, predictable lines. By August 1917, the Western Front's air war had reached a crisis point that most people today don't fully appreciate. The Royal Flying Corps was losing aircraft at a rate of 30% per month, not to mechanical failure or weather, but to German fighters who had learned to exploit a fundamental flaw in Allied tactics. British and French squadrons flew in tight, linear formations that looked magnificent during training but became death traps above the trenches. Pilots flew wingtip to wingtip in rigid lines, maintaining parade ground precision, while German Jastas, hunting packs led by aces like Manfred von Richthofen, swooped down from the sun and tore them apart. The mathematics were brutal. A typical British formation of 6 aircraft flying line abreast could only see threats directly ahead. Each pilot spent 80% of his attention maintaining formation position, not scanning for enemies. German pilots exploited this obsessively. Attack from behind, from below, from the flanks, anywhere except dead ahead, and you caught Allied pilots blind, locked into formation discipline, unable to maneuver without breaking the sacred line. Major Edward McManus, Britain's highest-scoring ace, wrote in his diary, "We're sending boys up in neat rows like ducks at a shooting gallery. The Germans don't fight formations. They fight individuals who happen to be flying close together." The statistics backed up the terror. During bloody April of 1917, the RFC lost 245 aircraft and 201 aircrew killed or missing, a 30% casualty rate in a single month. The average life expectancy of a British pilot on the Western Front was 11 days. 11 days from arrival at the front to a wooden cross or a smoking crater. What made this slaughter particularly devastating was that it wasn't about inferior technology. By mid-1917, British SE-5A and French SBAD Threed fighters were equal or superior to German Albatros and Fokker aircraft in speed, climb rate, and armament. The SE-5A could make 138 miles per hour at altitude and carried 2 machine guns, one .303 Vickers synchronized through the propeller, one 303 Lewis mounted on the upper wing. It was a superb fighting machine, but it was being flown using tactics developed for cavalry charges and infantry advances, tactics that assumed combat happened in 2 dimensions on a flat plane, where maintaining a cohesive line was paramount. The 3rd dimension, altitude, was being ignored. Energy management, mutual support, visual overlap, all aspect awareness, these concepts didn't exist in Allied tactical doctrine. Intelligence desperately needed answers. Why were German pilots, often flying inferior numbers, consistently outfighting larger Allied formations? British and French commanders studied gun camera footage and combat reports, interviewed survivors, analyzed wreckage. They documented the problem obsessively, but they couldn't see past their own assumptions. The breakthrough would come not from a headquarters, not from a tactical committee, not from senior command. It would come from a 23-year-old South African major with 16 kills who spent his mornings watching birds and his afternoons rewriting 1,000 years of military thinking about formation tactics. For 6 months, Major Andrew Beauchamp-Proctor had been conducting an unauthorized experiment. Every dawn patrol before breakfast, he would sit in the grass at the edge of his aerodrome with binoculars and watch the birds. Geese migrating south, starlings evading hawks, crows mobbing predators. And he noticed something that every pilot was too busy maintaining formation discipline to see. Nature had already solved the problem of 3-dimensional formation flying. Birds never flew in straight lines. They flew in offset patterns that maximized visual coverage and minimized individual vulnerability. German squadron commanders had every reason to feel confident. Manfred von Richthofen's tactical manual, distributed throughout the Jagdstaffeln in early 1917, explicitly stated, "The Englishman maintains his formation discipline even under attack. This is his weakness. Strike from the blind angle, and he will continue flying straight until you destroy him." Richthofen wasn't being arrogant. He was being accurate. The Royal Flying Corps' official tactical doctrine, FM-22, mandated that formations maintain cohesion and mutual support through disciplined station keeping. Translation: stay in line no matter what happens. Breaking formation was a court-martial offense. Pilots who survived combat by maneuvering independently were reprimanded for failing to maintain discipline under fire. This wasn't stupidity. It was military tradition meeting unprecedented technology. For centuries, formation discipline had been the foundation of military success. Roman legions, Napoleonic squares, cavalry charges, they all succeeded because individuals suppressed their survival instincts and maintained the formation. Senior RFC commanders, most of whom had distinguished cavalry careers, couldn't conceive that aerial combat required fundamentally different thinking. What they didn't realize was that the 3rd dimension changed everything. Hauptmann Rudolf Berthold, commander of Jasta 18, wrote to a friend in July 1917, "The British fly like they're on parade at Aldershot. Beautiful to watch, easy to kill. I hope they never change." He meant it as a professional assessment, not a boast. German pilots had developed tactics specifically designed to exploit linear formations. The Dicta Buelka, tactical principles created by Germany's first great ace, emphasized attacking from the blind spot, using altitude advantage, and striking formations at their most vulnerable point, from behind and below, where neat lines became neat targets. For the RFC, every attempted solution failed because every solution tried to make linear formations work better instead of questioning whether linear formations should exist at all. They tried flying tighter. Pilots collided. They tried flying looser. Formations disintegrated under attack. They tried adding rear-facing observers. SE.5A fighters were single-seaters. They tried radio communication. Vacuum tube radios in 1917 weighed 60 pounds and were fragile as porcelain. By August 1917, RFC commanders faced a terrible arithmetic. They were losing the air war, not because of technology, not because of pilot skill, not because of numbers. They were losing because their tactical doctrine was fundamentally incompatible with three-dimensional combat. And they couldn't see it. Then came Major Andrew Beauchamp-Proctor's morning of August 12th, when he led his flight not in the standard line-abreast formation, but in something he called the fluid V. Aircraft staggered in altitude and lateral position, each pilot covering overlapping fields of vision, each aircraft free to maneuver without breaking the formation's defensive integrity. The formation he'd learned from watching geese hunt the sky. Before we continue, I'd love to know where you're watching from and what you know about early fighter tactics and the evolution from rigid formations to fluid combat. Drop a comment below and let me know if you'd heard about Beauchamp-Proctor's experimental formations before, and if you're enjoying these deep dives into World War II and WWII aviation history, hit that subscribe button. These stories take serious research to get the details right, and knowing you're out there makes it all worthwhile. Major Andrew Beauchamp-Proctor was not a conventional officer. Born in South Africa, slight of build, suffering from chronic air sickness that required him to carry a bucket in his cockpit, he was everything a 1917 fighter ace wasn't supposed to be. But he had 16 confirmed kills and an obsessive mind that couldn't stop analyzing patterns. For 6 months, he'd been watching birds with the same intensity other pilots devoted to studying gun sights. He'd filled 3 notebooks with sketches, geese in V formations where each bird positioned itself to ride the wingtip vortex of the bird ahead, minimizing drag while maintaining visual contact with the flock, starlings executing murmurations. Thousands of birds moving as one fluid entity, each individual responding to its 7 nearest neighbors, creating formations that predators couldn't penetrate because they constantly shifted shape. Hunting hawks working in pairs, offset at different altitudes, one driving prey toward the other. The insight hit him during a dawn patrol in late July. Birds never flew in straight lines because straight lines created blind spots. Every successful predator species had evolved formations that maximized visual coverage while minimizing individual vulnerability. Nature had spent millions of years perfecting what human military doctrine ignored: three-dimensional tactical geometry. He started experimenting with his own flight. Subtle changes at first. Instead of flying wingtip to wingtip, he positioned his wingmen staggered, 200 feet behind and 500 feet higher. Then he added lateral offset, each aircraft not directly behind the other, but offset to the side, creating overlapping fields of vision. The formation looked wrong to every pilot who'd been trained in standard tactics. It looked loose, undisciplined, vulnerable. August 12th, 1917, 0620 hours. 6 SE-5A fighters lift off from Vert-Galand Aerodrome for morning patrol. Beauchamp-Proctor leads. His formation doesn't look like any other in the RFC. They climb to 15,000 feet in what he's calling the fluid V. 3 pairs of aircraft, each pair staggered in altitude by 1,000 feet, each individual aircraft offset laterally by 300 feet. From the ground, it looks like a school of fish swimming through the sky. From inside the formation, each pilot can see not just his own sector, but overlapping coverage of his wingmen's blind spots. The mathematics are elegant in a standard line abreast formation. 6 pilots cover 6 forward sectors. In Beauchamp-Proctor's fluid V, 6 pilots cover 14 sectors through overlapping fields of vision. And critically, no aircraft flies directly behind another. Every pilot can maneuver without masking his wingman's line of fire. 6:47 hours. They cross the lines at Albert, heading east toward German-held territory. The patrol plan calls for a sweep along the Bapaume Road, hunting for German two-seaters conducting artillery observation. 0653 hours. Beauchamp-Proctor spots them first. 3 Albatross D-3 fighters, 2,000 feet below, heading north. Standard Allied doctrine says dive on them immediately. Hit fast, hit hard, maintain formation during the attack. Beauchamp-Proctor doesn't dive. He signals his formation, enemy below, and then he does something that would get him court-martialed if his squadron commander were watching. He deliberately splits his formation. The highest pair, Captain James Thompson and Lieutenant Richard MacDonald, stay at 15,000 feet, covering from above. The middle pair, Lieutenants David Lewis and Harold Satchel, descend to 13,000 feet, positioning themselves ahead of the enemy's flight path. Beauchamp-Proctor and his wingman, Lieutenant Jeffrey Bowman, drop to 11,000 feet, approaching the Albatross formation from behind and below. The Germans spot Beauchamp-Proctor's pair first. Standard tactics. They split to meet the threat, confident they're engaging an isolated element they can destroy with superior numbers. What they can't see, what the geometry of their own formation prevents them from seeing, are the two pairs positioned above and ahead, already diving. 06I5 hours. The engagement lasts 90 seconds. The German leader breaks left. His wingman breaks right. Orthodox maneuvers to sandwich Beauchamp-Proctor between them. In a standard Allied formation, this works. The attacking fighters can't maneuver without breaking formation, and any that do become isolated targets. But Beauchamp-Proctor isn't flying a standard formation. As the German leader commits to his turn, Lewis and Satchel dive from ahead, already positioned along his future flight path. The German pilot sees them too late. They're not chasing him. They're intercepting him. Their Lewis guns already firing into the space where his aircraft will be in 2 seconds. The Albatross staggers. Fabric rips from the upper wing. The pilot breaks down, instinctively diving for speed and safety, directly into Thompson and MacDonald's line of fire. They descended 2,000 feet during the engagement, maintaining energy advantage, waiting. Thompson's synchronized Vickers gun stitches align across the Albatross's fuselage. The aircraft doesn't explode. That's Hollywood mythology. It shudders, streams white coolant vapor from its Mercedes D3 engine, and noses down in a controlled descent, trailing smoke. A forced landing, not a kill, but the pilot is out of the fight. The remaining 2 Albatross pilots don't press the attack. They can't understand what they're seeing. British fighters don't maneuver independently. British formations don't split and recombine like starlings evading a hawk. These pilots are breaking every rule of formation discipline, yet somehow maintaining mutual support, covering each other's blind spots, attacking from multiple axes simultaneously. The Germans break east and dive for their own lines. Beauchamp-Proctor doesn't pursue. Pursuing would mean abandoning formation integrity, exposing his aircraft to counterattack. He signals his flights to reform. Within 30 seconds, they're back in the fluid V, each aircraft in its staggered position, each pilot scanning his sector. 0712 hours. They return to Vert Galand without loss. During debrief, Beauchamp-Proctor sketches the engagement on a chalkboard. His squadron commander, Major Keith Caldwell, studies the diagram in silence. Then he says 4 words that will echo through military aviation history. Teach everyone, starting today. Within 72 hours, 3 RFC squadrons were experimenting with variations of Beauchamp-Proctor's fluid formations. Within 2 weeks, RFC headquarters had issued Tactical Memorandum 17, titled Alternative Formation Geometries for Fighter Operations. The document was revolutionary because it didn't mandate a single formation. It legitimized flexibility itself. The testing revealed principles that seem obvious now, but were heretical in 1917. First, formations should maximize visual overlap, not visual aesthetics. A formation that looked disciplined from the ground was worthless if pilots couldn't see threats developing from multiple vectors. Second, altitude variance within a formation wasn't disorder. It was force multiplication. Aircraft at different altitudes could maneuver without masking each other and attack from vertical angles that linear formations couldn't defend against. Third, and most critically, maintaining formation position during combat wasn't discipline. It was suicide. Real discipline meant maintaining mutual support while adapting to three-dimensional geometry. Major Mick Mannock, Britain's leading ace, flew with Beauchamp-Proctor's formation for one patrol and wrote, "It felt wrong for the first 5 minutes. You're not tucked in tight. You feel exposed. Then you realize you can see everything. You're not watching your wingman's tail. You're watching the sky. And your wingman is watching your blind spots. It's not a formation. It's an organism." What engineers and tacticians discovered was that bird formations weren't arbitrary. They were solutions to optimization problems that applied equally to aircraft. Migrating geese flew in V formations because each bird positioned itself to extract maximum lift efficiency while maintaining visual contact with the flock. Fighter aircraft needed the same balance: energy efficiency through formation structure, survivability through visual overlap. Intelligence officers realized they'd been studying the wrong thing. They'd analyzed German tactics, German aircraft, German pilots. They hadn't questioned Allied tactics because tactics weren't intelligence targets. They were doctrine, handed down from command. Beauchamp-Proctor's breakthrough came from questioning the doctrine itself, from recognizing that nature had already solved the problem the RFC was dying to overcome. By September 1917, RFC kill ratios began shifting. Squadrons flying fluid formations, called finger four variations by modern historians, achieved loss rates 40% lower than squadrons maintaining traditional line formations. The Luftstreitkräfte noticed. German tactical reports from autumn 1917 described British formations as uncharacteristically flexible and difficult to isolate individual aircraft. Most critically, the concept spread beyond British forces. French ace René Fonck developed his own variation after encountering RFC formations over Verdun. American squadrons arriving in 1918 trained in finger four from day one. The rigid lines that had defined the war's first 3 years began dissolving into fluid, adaptive patterns. The psychological shift was as important as the tactical one. Pilots who'd spent months feeling like targets in a shooting gallery suddenly had agency. They could maneuver without breaking formation. They could respond to threats without waiting for formation leaders to initiate action. Combat shifted from parade ground discipline to dynamic decision-making. German squadrons adapted quickly, abandoning their own rigid Ketten formations in favor of similar staggered patterns. The tactical arms race accelerated. By spring 1918, both sides were flying variations of offset, altitude staggered formations that would have been unrecognizable to pilots from 1915. What started with one major watching geese became the foundation for modern fighter tactics. The finger four formation, 2 pairs of aircraft in staggered altitude and lateral positions, would dominate World War II fighter combat. The U.S. Navy's Thach Weave, developed in 1942, is a direct descendant. Modern fighting wing tactics used by F-16 and F-22 pilots trace their lineage directly to Beauchamp-Proctor's experiments over the Somme in August 1917. The numbers told the story with brutal clarity. Before August 1917, RFC squadrons flying standard line-abreast formations achieved kill-to-loss ratios averaging 1.2.1, barely better than even. After October 1917, squadrons flying fluid formations achieved ratios averaging 2.8.1. Same pilots, same aircraft, different geometry. The difference saved hundreds of lives. Major Andrew Beauchamp-Proctor survived the war with 54 confirmed kills, making him South Africa's highest-scoring ace. He received the Victoria Cross, Distinguished Service Order with 2 bars, and Military Cross with 2 bars, one of the most decorated pilots of the war. Tragically, he died in a flying accident in 1921 while practicing aerobatics for an air show, killed not by German guns, but by a peacetime crash. He was 26 years old. His tactical innovations outlived him by a century. By 1918, every major air force had abandoned rigid linear formations. The United States Army Air Service, entering the war with minimal combat experience, adopted fluid formations from the start, learning from British and French experiments. Eddie Rickenbacker's 94th Aero Squadron flew staggered pairs as standard practice. They achieved kill ratios that would have been impossible using 1916 tactics. The legacy extended far beyond World War I. In the 1930s, Luftwaffe tacticians Günther Lützow and Werner Mülders refined the concept into the Rote und Schwarm, 2 pairs of aircraft in mutually supporting positions, which became the standard fighter formation of World War II. RAF Fighter Command adopted nearly identical tactics, calling them the Finger Four, because the aircraft positioned themselves like spread fingers on a hand, staggered, offset, but moving together. The impact was measurable in blood not spilled. During the Battle of Britain in 1940, RAF squadrons flying Finger Four formations achieved loss rates 35% lower than squadrons still using the outdated Vic formation inherited from the 1920s. German pilots explicitly noted in combat reports that British formations had become significantly harder to engage effectively. American pilots learning fighter tactics in 1941 studied Beauchamp-Proctor's formations as foundational concepts. Lieutenant Commander John Thach's famous Thach Weave, the defensive scissors maneuver that negated Japanese zero advantages during the Pacific War, was built on principles of mutual support and overlapping fields of fire that originated in Beauchamp-Proctor's bird observations. Modern fighter doctrine still carries his DNA. The fighting wing concept, 2 aircraft operating as a single tactical element with defined responsibilities for visual coverage and mutual support, is standard across every air force globally. F-22 pilots flying combat air patrol missions over Syria use formations that Beauchamp-Proctor would recognize instantly: offset positions, altitude variance, overlapping visual sectors. Historians estimate that tactical innovations in fighter formations during World War I, primarily stemming from Beauchamp-Proctor's experiments, reduced overall pilot casualties by 15–20% during the war's final year. That translates to roughly 400 to 600 aircrew who returned home instead of dying in flaming wreckage over France. 400 lives saved because one man watched geese fly south and asked why human formations didn't look like that. The lesson extended beyond aviation. Post-war military theorists recognized that Beauchamp-Proctor had challenged something fundamental: the assumption that traditional formation, discipline translated automatically to new warfare domains. Sometimes innovation requires questioning not just tactics, but the philosophical assumptions underlying those tactics. There's a profound humility in looking to nature for solutions to human problems. We build machines that soar faster than any bird, but we forget that birds have been solving the problems of 3-dimensional movement for 100 million years. Evolution is the ultimate engineer. testing solutions through life and death across geological timescales. Andrew Beauchamp-Proctor's genius wasn't in his flying skill or his marksmanship. It was in his willingness to sit in the grass with binoculars and admit that geese knew something the Royal Flying Corps didn't. Military doctrine is necessary. It provides structure, predictability, the foundation for coordinated action. But doctrine becomes dogma when we stop questioning whether our assumptions match reality. For 3 years, thousands of pilots died maintaining formation discipline because no one asked whether formation discipline, as defined by cavalry traditions and parade ground aesthetics, made sense 15,000 feet above the Western Front. One pilot noticed birds flying in formation, offset, staggered, each covering the other's blind spots, and rewrote the entire combat doctrine of aerial warfare. August 12, 1917. One unauthorized formation, one 90-second engagement, one tactical principle that would save thousands of lives and define fighter combat for the next century. Sometimes the most revolutionary military innovations don't come from laboratories or headquarters or engineering committees. Sometimes they come from a 23-year-old major with chronic air sickness, sitting in the morning grass, watching geese head south, and asking the simplest question in the world. Why don't we fly like that? If you found this story as fascinating as I did researching it, I'd appreciate if you'd like this video and subscribe to the channel. There are dozens more untold stories from World War I and World War II that deserve to be remembered, and I'll be bringing you a new one every week. What should I cover next? Let me know in the comments below.